an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering King of Scars, chapters 20, 21, and 22. In these chapters, Isaak gets put to the test for the first time, and there are some moments where it's not really looking great, and it seems like he sort of saved himself, and we do get some unfortunate confirmation that he seemed to succeed, at least with someone, but it made me extremely anxious. Also, there's a whole thing with Nikolai. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. I don't think that anybody is here in the chat right now, but if anybody joins me, welcome. Hi. So these three episodes, or these three chapters, were really like what we're going through with Nina. I find particularly compelling because Hanne is a sort of wild card for me. With what's going on with Nikolai and Zoya, we've got some new characters that have been added to the mix, but it feels very clear what their motivations are and desires are, and that they are not connected to humanity anyway, in a sense that kind of gives them a relatability that I can latch onto. So they feel sort of, as much as they are extremely weird and feel very like tonally different than other things that have been in these books, I still feel like I kind of know where I stand with them. And Hanne, I don't. I keep like waiting for the other shoe to drop. I have a feeling that she's going to wind up being an ally and trustworthy, but as of right now, I just feel like there could be, it almost seems like she's like too good to be true or something. I don't know, you know? And I really appreciate the fact that as much as Nina likes her, she also doesn't fully trust her and isn't willing to give her all of the information that she might otherwise give. Because she's just like, yeah, you really haven't earned that. Like, no offense, but I'll give you a kind of information that is somewhat true, but my history in relation to it is completely false. And that feels like a really good balance. I just really love Nina's chapters because she is reckless sometimes, but in a way that always feels very justified and understandable to me. And it's never just stupidity. It's never just, oh, I got so like over emotional. It just feels like she has reasons that other people wouldn't understand even if she tried to explain it, you know? And that goes for right now and dealing with like the weird effects of having her power inverted by Parem. And also it feels like what she was going through before when she was still addicted really badly. And people just didn't really understand what she was going through because none of them had a context for it. They had no frame of reference, you know? So in many ways, as much as Nina can be like extremely sociable and a diplomat, and she seems in a lot of ways one of the lonelier characters to me. And I just find that sort of compelling. You know, I'm somebody who, in situations where I'm dealing with people, I can really shine. But I do feel like I don't know how to relate to people on a real level a lot of the time. In situations where I know very much what our relationship is because it's delineated as like customer and I'm customer service, I know how to like work that to my advantage. Or, you know, I'm the new person meeting a spouse's family for the first time and I am meant to like make myself agreeable and fun and polite. But in terms of like being able to really make friends and like feel comfortable around people, that can be extremely tricky for me. I don't like to let my guard down very much. And I find surface level relationships on my downtime to be really tiring and not rewarding. So I feel like a weird affinity for her as somebody who is, on the surface, I seem like an outright extrovert, but I'm really, really not. And there are times where I sort of feel like that is how Nina is as well. And she's just gone through some shit, man, and the grief that she's dealing with, grief is a really lonely thing. That is something that, like, you can connect with somebody else who also misses the person that you miss. But when you have lost somebody who is as close to you and as important to your life as Matthias was to her life, it's just not something that can be shared by anybody else in a real way. You can talk to a person who knows who he was and might miss him as well, but it's never really going to feel like they get it. And she's just, between that and in some ways her companions seeming to sort of lose patience with her regarding that to a degree, and the fact that she is, experiencing this weird sort of psychic feedback from her ability, there's just so many changes happening with her mentally that it would be a lot for anybody to deal with, I just think that over the past year, 2 years really, I have some trouble personally sometimes understanding in a real way how much of an effect various types of like massive change or trauma, sometimes outright trauma, what kind of toll they can take mentally. I can know intellectually that they take a massive toll and that people go through these like really difficult, but it's different to know that intellectually than it is to actually really get it and believe it because you've gone through it. And I think a lot of us are realizing at the end of 2021 how much these past 2 years have changed everything about the way that we see the world, the way that we see ourselves, the goals that we had that now seem either not possible or not important, the way that like the passage of time has weirdly been affected. And I feel like I have a new appreciation for what a tremendous impact things like that can have on us. And I feel like Nina in some ways is in the same place. It's like she's obviously got a lot more very specific, unique scenarios happening. But I think that she considered herself in some ways above some of the like reactions that she's been having. So anyway, I'm gonna start with Adric was furious, still glum, but furious. It was like being yelled at by a damp towel. That is such a good line. And later on, she calls him like a melted candle. And I swear to God, I just loved it. Here it is. Adric looked at her with his moping, melting candle expression. I feel like these two descriptions helped me understand Adric in a way that the other descriptions of him did not. As soon as she said melting candle expression, I immediately pictured Eeyore, and it just feels like now I get it. Now I understand who he is a little bit better. So he knows what she went to do. She has explained to them everything that's happening. And he is yelling at her not only for taking the risk that she did, but she basically took this risk for no material gain that will help them in their mission. And that seems to be more than anything what he can't really forgive her for. He's like, they're going to increase security because they know that somebody has been looking around. They might report what happened, and that might send more security to the town in general, which means that we are going to have to get the fuck out. And if they are using a drug to subdue these women, you didn't get a sample of it for us to investigate what mixture it is and what they're even doing. And he is just like, we're going to have to fucking vacate. And she basically tells him, leave me here because I'm not fucking going anywhere. And he's just like, you know, as well as I do, that these girls are going to die no matter what. And you're going to just sit here and act like you can do anything to save them. And you know that ship has sailed, like it's too late. And when she tries to say, because he's like, you know, we aren't going to be able to bring them back from this. She says, I came back from it. And I thought, obviously, like I was expecting her to say that. And I knew that this wasn't the same situation, but I didn't stop and like question what that was. And he points out, you came back after 1 dose. And I was like, oh, that's true. Like she got hit with it 1 time and it nearly destroyed her life. So these women who have been given dosages over and over again, I mean, that is a totally different situation. And what is sort of like the suggestion that is made here is that they aren't getting given pure parem. They are being given something that's probably a mixture in order to keep it from being quite as like intense. And because she's like saying it's not ordinary parem. But again, she didn't get a sample of it. She doesn't know. And Adric is obviously, more than anything, kind of freaked by the fact that she is willing to go against direct orders. That seems to be what he's having the hardest time with. Not just what a risk this is. I think he'd be willing to take a risk. I think the fact that this is going to be against the explicit mission they are supposed to be on, that is what he is just really not feeling copacetic about. And eventually, Leonie, they ask her like her opinion, and they're each trying to convince her, and she tells them to stop. And then she tells them some backstory that when she nearly died as a child, it was due to poisoned well water, and the woman who healed her died while pulling the poison out of her body and basically sacrificed her own life to save Leonie. And when she says this, she sort of gives a sad smile and says, like I told you, poisons are tricky work. So I don't know if the implication there is that this woman didn't intend to give her life, if it was like meant to. It sounds like what she's saying is she fucked up a little bit and she wound up dead, and maybe that didn't have to happen, but that's what happened. And she wears 2 different stones: topaz for strength, for my mother who gave me life and raised me to be a fighter; amethyst for Aditi Hili, the fabricator who returned my life to me when I was careless and might have lost it. I took her family name and swore I would honor her sacrifice and that I would make something of the life she gave to me. If we're not here for the girls on that ward, then what are we doing here? Adric is like, this isn't a vote. You know that I'm in charge, right? And she smiles at him. I love this. Leonie smiled, that brilliant 1,000 sunrise smile. Adric sucked in a breath as if he'd taken a blow to the gut. I really enjoy that. There are some people in this world that when they smile at you like that, it just happens, you know? And I really enjoy this moment. And it's not like she's doing it to weaponize it. She's not purposely smiling like Nina sometimes has, where it's like a targeted thing. She is smiling because she's like, yeah, I know you though. And it's just, you aren't going to be able to resist doing something like this either. The 2 of you are impossible and guilty of insubordination. Leonie only smiled wider. We're splendid, and you know it. Fine, Adric huffed. Since you're both so determined to compromise our mission, Just how are we going to transport a bunch of infants and pregnant women out of this tragedy of a town and get them to a port in the middle of the night? Easy. We do it in the middle of the day, and we make sure they see us coming. I really don't know what this means, but I cannot wait to find out, because if there's anybody that I know can set up a good con, it's fucking Nina. So then we go to the lesson. Nina is waiting for Hanne to show up, and she's not sure whether or not she'll actually come. Turns out, well, Mother made her come. Basically was like, you aren't going to be idle. So yeah, definitely attend. And when Hanne shows up, I was sort of expecting her to be like a little bit more forgiving. And I don't know why I expected that, but that is not the vibe. She is extremely angry. And there was a part of me that appreciated that. It felt much more true and more challenging, which I find more interesting. But we aren't quite there yet. Nina, she is like, it's before the lesson and she's stopping on the way in the woods, and this other student sort of sneaks up on her. I say student, but like well-maiden, I guess, really. I wanted to thank you and the Zemini traders for not saying anything about what you saw by the river, even after what happened to Greta. And Nina is sort of like pressing this girl for a little bit more information on Hanne, because she doesn't know anything about Hanne, and she's aware Hanne might not be happy with her and not be willing to share. So she gets it out of this girl that Hanne will sneak out of the convent to help people who get sick, or and like, you know, they can't afford help, or women who are pregnant but they're not married, and so nobody wants to help them deliver the baby. And they're all folks that reached out to the well mother, and for various reasons she turned them down for help. And this is when Nina is realizing, oh my God, she's using her power and doesn't realize that's what she's doing. And these other girls, when she said, like, it's a game to them and it's not for me, I thought I knew what she meant, that she was just more determined to make something of herself. But I didn't realize that she already had like some shit that she was up to that was genuinely meaningful and had an impact on the world. And I feel like this really raises her in Nina's estimation a great deal. It's really a very like inspirational thing, you know? It's just bucking authority in general, when it has been drilled into you how much you are supposed to listen to your elders. Doing something with an ability that you could get in trouble for using, even if she doesn't know that's what she's doing, there is a part of her that probably does. And generally just like flying in the face of societal expectation and what's considered acceptable. She's going out there and helping people that are being turned away because they are sinful or a disgrace in some way. This is all like brave, badass stuff. And she says, sometimes I think Gavval doesn't want us here. The girl says this. The convent? She shook her head, eyes distant. Girls, any of us. I know that she's talking about where she is specifically, but man, if that isn't a mood sometimes, you know, honestly, I have not personally been through the kinds of oppression that many women around the world have, but it can feel like women are just not wanted, just period. So this is when she like is waiting for Hanne, and Hanne walks in. I didn't say I wanted to continue. What were you doing at the factory? I want the truth. So what Nina decides to tell her is, you know, she invented that sister that she had told her about having like this whole happy ending last time. And she explains this like story that feels believable enough and is rooted in enough truth that it manages to still get the job done. She was caught. I don't know how it happened, but she was caught using her Grisha power, and she was taken by the Druskel. Her husband was taken too and put to death for harboring her secrets. The factory is only part of the story. Soldiers are keeping Grisha girls in the abandoned wing and experimenting on them. The Well Mother is helping, along with some of the Spring Maidens. And Hanne folds her arms and is like, they would never do that. And Nina says, don't cover your ears and pretend you don't know what men are capable of. That's a good line. Because this is the thing that I think all of us run into as we begin to see the world a little bit more clearly. You don't want to. You know, nobody wants to know the things. We don't open our eyes to them because they're easy and make life better to know about. It's just, it is truth. And you either are willing to face that or not. And there's a shocking number of people that are not, you know, and you're either going to have the courage to look at that shit or you're going to be a fucking coward. And basically Nina is calling her bluff. Like, are you going to be a fucking coward about it? Because you know that women have been going missing. And at first she keeps arguing about like, well, things happened to people, you know, Fjerda can be really like a difficult, brutal place to live. And this is when Nina pushes her and is asking like, you've seen the ice court. Do you think that was built with human hands? What if Fjerda needs Grisha as much as it hates them? Hanne bit her lip and gazed out of the classroom window. There was a girl here, she said hesitantly. Eleanor, a novitiate. She always kept to herself. One morning she was just gone. The sisters told us that she'd secured an offer of marriage and gone to Gersholm, but when I snuck into the woods to ride that day, I saw the Well Mother. She was burning Eleanor's things. And a woman who lived between here and Kerjut. Sylvie Winther. She had just come through a bad illness. She was faring well. She and her husband just packed up and left. And Nina is just like, yeah, see, you know. They're like, and what they're doing is not forgivable. What are we supposed to do about it? Save them, said Nina. Save them all. And then we go to Isaak. This is just so anxiety inducing to read. I mean, just honestly, it's like a dream where you are on stage and realize that you're expected to play a part and you haven't read your lines, or you are sitting in class and it turns out there's an exam today and you didn't know. It's like, it's not exactly because like Isaak knew this was coming. He's been being tutored and coached on all of this. He is prepared to a point, you know, he knows this is, but it's still like, it just feels so different when you are surrounded by folks that are expecting something and they have no vested interest in your success, first of all. In fact, they may have a vested interest in unmasking you for the imposter that you are. And they are not going to be rooting for you in any way. And they're going to be seeing your actions instead of like with the eye of somebody going, well, that's pretty good for like a commoner. They'll be looking at you expecting a king and be comparing you against the best version of a king that they have in their mind. There's just a whole different pack of expectations there. And that's all just talking about the actual the customs and what's the word I want? The titles that you're expected to use, the ways of addressing. That's all very simple. And then you have to imitate somebody's actual personality. And that is a whole other thing, especially when that person tends to be extremely witty. I mean, there is nothing worse than somebody who isn't witty trying to pretend they are, trying to play that role. It's painful to watch. Very luckily, Isaak is able to do this and really nails it. Like, there is a certain amount of almost divine intervention, it feels like here, that they should all be deeply grateful for. But that does not mean that it comes to him easily. And there's a bunch of different moments here. First of all, it starts off with him sitting on the throne and he's thinking about how bad he has to pee. And he can't move here. And he is given all these gifts as people arrive. And he is like trying to judge who are actual friends and who are enemies. And he has to greet a bunch of Fjerdanes when they're the ones who shot him. And the Shu family was entirely female. Shu party, sorry, not family. Princess Kirtaban wore emerald silks embroidered with silver leaves, her long dark hair caught up in jeweled combs. She was known as the least beautiful but the most beloved of the 5 royal sisters. The Tavgarad marched behind their charge, expressions fixed in the hard, empty gaze Isaak had mastered during his own tenure as a palace guard. They were elite fighters. They wore black uniforms, the screaming beak of a falcon carved from garnet on the left epaulette. Sounds kind of badass, honestly. Tamar had said one of them intended to defect, but which, Isaak wondered, scanning their faces. The princess wobbled slightly in her curtsy, a light sheen of sweat on her upper lip, and Isaak saw the face of the guard directly behind her harden even further. He knew he shouldn't, but he felt for the princess as she rose from her curtsy and gave him a tremulous smile. He had gotten the barest taste of what it meant to be royal, and he didn't like it at all. And I really, really enjoyed this bit because I think it could be very easy to write a character who gets put in this position and then begins to grow sort of attached to the trappings of power and the luxury associated with it and starts to not want to give their spot up. And I think a very cliche story would go in that direction. But instead, what we're getting is somebody who is realizing like how incredibly tiring this is. And just everything about it feels so false and it all has to be measured so carefully. And as they're riding out to Osalta, Tolia tells him to stop gaping at everything. You must look at the world as if you own it because you are the king, and you do. You could order this city and every building in it burned to the ground. I should hope someone would stop me. Someone might try, said Tamar, and he'd probably be hanged for it. And this is really, I love this so much. Like, this is something that I don't know if you can imitate that. There is an innate, when people are born with privilege and access and property and entitlement, there is a vibe that goes with that I don't know if you can fake. I think you can grow into actually having that vibe yourself if you've lived long enough after gaining those things in your life, if you weren't born with them. But I don't know if you've never had them and you still don't, that you can really like pull that off completely. It depends how close people are looking. I love this too. Isaak managed to get the horses wrong too, because a king did not leap down and take his mount to the stables. He waited for the groom. A king tossed the reins to him with a smile and a bob of the head and a many thanks, Clement, or a how's your cough, Lyov? Because of course Nikolai Lantsov knew the names of every servant in the palace. If he'd been a lazier sovereign, this might have been easier. The way everyone gazed at him frightened him. And I love this. He's like, when he's first putting on the uniform, he's feeling very proud. And I mean the uniform of the army, you know. The bizarre experience of everyone stepping out of his way. It had been nothing like this. Had he looked at the king the way these people did, full of open gratitude and admiration? And what about the others who looked on the king with suspicion and sometimes outright fear? And I love this moment. There's a bunch of women that are hanging out their windows, dressed up, obviously dolled up with makeup and stuff. And he's talking to Toya and is like, Nikolai doesn't fuck with the common women, right? Like, I haven't heard any rumors about that. That's not him. And Toya's like, oh no, he never does that. And he's just like, well, then what are they doing? And Toya says, dude, you've got to have heard enough fairy tales and stories about a king who falls in love with a beautiful woman just by looking at her. And she's a commoner and he takes her for wife anyway. Like, tale as old as time. They are hoping to catch your eye and cause you to fall in love with a girl's beauty or the curve of her neck or her auburn hair. I love this so much. It just feels very true. I feel like if I were a common girl and I knew the king was coming and I was, in the full bloom of my youth, I would absolutely be like, maybe let me see if I can get this guy's attention. I feel like I definitely would do that. So he begins his speech, his voice cracks, and he has to start over. And he does his best. There is this moment, though, where the doors opened in front of him as they're about to walk into the dining hall, the dining room. Dining hall makes it sound like they're at a fucking college dorm or something. And he sweeps to the side at attention the way that he was trained to do as a soldier, and has to figure out how to play this off so that it seems intentional rather than an accident, because people gasp. He sketched a shallow bow and used the seconds he gained to fix a confident smile on his face. Tonight, I am first a host and then a king. Of course, said the princess, though she appeared utterly flummoxed. The rest of the guests filed past, some of them looking amused, others pleased, others disapproving. Isaak stood there and kept his smile pasted on, his chin lifted as if this were all a test for Ravka's next queen. I really like that idea in particular. Just be like, yeah, I'm just, trying to throw you off your game and see how well you can stay on task and focused. This is all about me testing you. It's a good way to play it. That feels like it could be very convincing. And Genya tells him, you're doing marvelously. David frowned. So then when you said this is a fiasco, it's a figure of speech. But be silent, David. Genya offered him a brittle approximation at a smile. At best, our visitors think Nikolai is eccentric, and at worst, insane. All over one tiny breach of etiquette? Isaak did his best not to show his distress as he took his seat and the meal began. There were 1,000 rules to remember when it came to formal dining, but they'd sidestepped many of them this first night by serving their guests a Ravkan peasant feast, complete with fiddles and dancing. That is a very good idea, and it's an excellent way to make yourself seem like you're more down to earth and in touch with your people. And there's one moment where the Fjerdan ambassador asks about getting Nina Zenek extradited. And they tell him she'd been on a trade mission to Kerch for nearly 2 years. And he's like, yeah, I don't fucking buy that. And Isaak has to come up with a joke to sort of put him off. So eventually the dinner ends. And he's being led back to his quarters. And Toya stops him because he can smell something. And Tamar can also smell it. It smells like garlic, but is arsine gas, or maybe arsine gas. I am going to see if this is a real thing. I'm checking this. Arson. A poisonous gas smelling slightly of garlic made by the reaction of some arsenides with acids. From arsenic, on the pattern of amine. Huh. Okay. Interesting. So this is a real thing. And I really enjoy this moment because even though this is somebody who is trying to kill him, Toya considers this very much a win. If somebody is trying to kill him, that means that they fucking bought it, which is what we want. So good for you. And I really do wonder how much longer we're going to have Isaak in, like, you know, imitating Nikolai, and how much we're going to see exactly how this all goes. I would really like to see him from an external perspective. Because, you know, it's one thing for him to be in his head and for us to see how nervous he is versus what he's trying to project. But it's another thing to be able to see whether it looks genuine. So I'd kind of like to be in Genya's head, or I'm trying to think who else is there that's a main enough character that we would actually see from their eyes. But I feel like Genya is really the main one. So then we go to Nikolai. And this whole thing is just so bizarre to him. He is trying, first of all, he's having trouble with the whole sleeping thing because he knows that he isn't able to here, but he's also not sure if he lets himself rest, if the like monster is going to come out. He was deeply tired, and yet it was as if his body had lost any sense of time. Listen, it's like he lived through the pandemic, I'm telling you. Exhausted, but also like, is it time for bed? I don't even know what's happening. We don't eat. We don't sleep. I don't remember what it is to sweat or hunger or dream. The saints had been trapped here for hundreds of years. How had they not lost their minds? And I'm like, honestly, same question. I genuinely, this sounds fucking awful. And there's a part of me that sort of wonders, like, can they possibly have everybody's best interests at heart after all of this time? They haven't been, like, somehow warped by their experience here? I don't know. And he's thinking about what they could be doing back in Ravka. Well, I guess he's still in Ravka, technically. But back at the palace, now that he has gone missing. And I love this. He's thinking about like the course of action they could take and how he had never gotten anybody appropriately trained to impersonate him. And that he maybe would have still been willing to take the chance with some of the people that he had thought of. But he knew Genya and the others were far too sensible to court that kind of disaster. Oh, Nikolai. I wonder what he'll think of all of this once he finds out how it went. There was still time to salvage the festival, their leverage with Kirch, all of it, if the saints made good on their promises and if Nikolai survived the burning thorn. Then he could at least give Ravka a fighting chance. He would have to find a bride immediately, make the alliance Zoya had pushed so hard for, marriage to a stranger, a performance of civility without true companionship. He would be acting for the rest of his life. And this is the thing for me. This is also something that I find really interesting about people who become online celebrities. There's just a whole thing that has happened, even with celebrities who aren't purely online. This is definitely a thing, but I feel like if you aren't purely online, you grow to be a celebrity because of your work and not because of who you are personally. But when you grow to be famous on the interwebs, you know, for me, for example, if I were to grow famous, people would know everything about me because I talk about myself constantly on these shows. And so I'm able to be genuine because I share a lot and people like have a better sense of who I am. That said, I would still be like watched a lot. And if you have a different presence, I'm able to get away with a lot because as much as I am a public figure, and I put that in quotes, I have very few followers really comparatively on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. But people who really hit it big, who have millions of followers, and they're just because they're influencers of some kind, you have to create a weird parasocial relationship with your fans in order to be successful. Your fans want to get to know you and feel like they are your friend. And so you have to satisfy that desire while also cultivating a certain brand for yourself every time that you engage in anything with them. And because of what I do, I'm not an influencer. I am a podcaster, and it's a very specific thing that I do. I don't have to constantly be on or be cultivating a particular aesthetic with my posts. But there are people out there that their whole income is based around it looking like they live a certain kind of lifestyle. And there's a couple, and I can't remember their name now, but the woman in this couple was the author of that book, Girl, Wash Your Face. And they were influencers who somehow took off. She wrote this book about finding your potential. And then the two of them started hosting workshops about marriage and how to become a successful couple and get through problems together. And then 8 months later announced they were divorcing. And I always think about this because honestly, I respect how brave they are for deciding to divorce after selling workshops like that, because they have essentially in many ways sort of destroyed their brand. And it's not like they might not be able to come back from this ever, but they put themselves in a position where in order to be successful, they would have to act for the rest of their lives. They would have to, if they wanted to continue living with the same kind of income and the same lifestyle, if they weren't going to be true to themselves and actually end their marriage and deal with the fallout of that, they would have to pretend to be a happy couple. And there are plenty of people out there willing to do that, willing to pretend, because that's everything that their world is built around. And whether that's an actual income stream because they're influencers, or because they are politically in a certain position, or because they are socially in a certain position and, in their circle, which affords them a certain kind of hierarchy, they don't want to lose status. It all amounts to the same thing, which is having to maintain a certain image. And that just sounds incredibly tiring to me. I just don't know how people in that kind of position do that, because for me, it's odd. I'm not private. I'll tell people everything about myself, but I don't want to be accessible all the time, And I just can't imagine what it is like. You would have to hire somebody to help you every step of the way too, because if you make one false move, you ruin it. You truly crash your ship. The husband in that couple, he just made some really poorly thought out comments in an Instagram post, and that has sunk him. So his wife, even though they divorced, they were still maybe going to be okay. And then he started to go off, and he's kind of completely lost his following in a lot of ways, while she is still managing to scrape by and might be able to pull it out at the end. And that's the thing is people want to have full control over their own presence, but maybe you shouldn't when your presence is so on a knife's edge like that. Maybe you should have somebody who, is what's the word I want? A buffer, a middleman to just sort of go over things the way Adele wound up having to do. So anyway, Nikolai here, he gets, this is so weird, guys. He gets summoned by a bear cub. Where his back legs should have been, he had two wheels, the spokes of which looked distinctly like finger bones. The effect was both enchanting and bizarre. I'm sorry. I don't think enchanting at all, thank you. I'm sorry, but no. No. Nope. Not really. Just don't. I don't see it. Not for me. That's horrifying. That's terrible. That's very upsetting. I deeply dislike, upset, don't like. Ugh, I hate this. Honestly, Grigory is really upsetting in general. So it turns out Grigory is the body maker, I think is what he's called later. And I didn't really understand exactly how this worked. But he could make anybody. And he talks later on about how maybe he did more than he should have because he just wanted to see if he could. And so he was making children for women who didn't have infant children of their own. He was making wives for men who wanted wives. He made a huge like monster to guard a particular like wealthy person's home. I didn't realize it was like that. And it sort of changes the whole way that things are. Like, you know, we had that amazing bridge made out of flesh and bone that was considered a miracle. And I was kind of like, is it a miracle? Because that sounds really gross and horrible. And I'm realizing like, it's not necessarily horrible. It may be gross, but it just seems sinister because when you see like body parts and bones and stuff, you think of death, you think of decay, you think of, I'm seeing these body parts because something happened to the body they were in. That person was murdered or butchered or something. So you have this immediate reaction of just like, yeah, that cannot be a good thing. But finding out that he was able to make life, not just body parts, but he was able to create life in a way. That's wild. Like, wow. I mean, I don't even know what I would do with that kind of ability. Like, I could understand why he experimented wildly the way he did, because if you were given that ability, you'd kind of be like, well, why would I be given this and not allowed to fully use it? But yeah, it turns out that Grigory can't control his form anymore, and his body just shifts like the moment that a certain thought enters his head, and it's very tiring, and he really doesn't like it. And this has resulted in him kind of becoming a hermit because he doesn't want people to look at him. He feels like, you know, just the whole thing, it's just kind of too much. And this whole thing, we find out about how he was killed. I won't get into the whole story because truly it's just very sad. I was a healer, but I did things that perhaps I should not have. I made babies for mothers who had none. I made brides for men who desired them. I made a great soldier 12 feet tall with fists like boulders to protect a count's castle. I had no care for the boundaries that governed my power. Merzost was too great a lure. I thought little of whether I should do a thing, but only if I could. Death is easy, but birth, resurrection, the works of creation belong to the first maker alone. I trafficked in Merzost and lost control of my own form, so I became a hermit for a time. Eventually, of course, people sought me out, eager to learn my secrets regardless of how disturbed they were by the way I looked. We're always drawn to the lure of power, no matter the cost. They call me the body maker, and I took on hundreds of students over time. I taught them how to use their gifts for healing and for combat. They went out into the world and all bore my name, or a form of it. This is where the word Grisha evidently comes from. And this was really interesting to me here. So, he eventually says, I'm trying to find the spot here where here it is. Okay. Uri claims we're about to enter an age of saints. Grigory sighed. Do you know why the monster inside you awoke? Why the Darkling's power was able to emerge after all this time? It began with the drug, Parem. It made things possible that never should be. It altered the bounds of Grisha power. Parem? And Grigory continues, if the drug had been eradicated. And Nikolai says, we tried. The teeth in Grigory's many mouths grew longer. You did not. You tried to alter it, bend it to your will. That is the lure of power. And that, I think, is the thing that can be difficult, because you do, like all of us, want to believe that if there is some source of power out there, just destroying it seems like a real waste. Maybe there is something we can do with it. Maybe there is a way that we can handle it or harness it for something better. And you don't want to think of that as the lure of power. You want to think of it as, I'm genuinely trying to think of something like good for the world. But when you boil it down, it is power, you know? Even if it's like ideals that you're pursuing, it does really come down to, this feels like a major power to use toward that. And I found it fascinating that he considers Purim to be the source of this like resurgence here. That's really fascinating to me. Like, I just want to know a lot more about that. So this is when Yuri comes in, and Grigory basically like makes tracks as soon as Yuri turns up, and Yuri's worried that he gave offense, and Nikolai has to be like, I'm pretty sure he's worried about giving offense himself because he looks like a freak. So it turns out that he's here in order to tell Nikolai that he has been summoned by Elisabetta. And Nikolai's like, okay, so we have to go get Zoya. And Yuri's like, well, she didn't ask for Zoya. And Nikolai's like, I didn't ask if she asked for Zoya. Did I ask that? I don't remember asking that. I don't think I did. Basically, I'm going to do what the fuck I want. And there's this very interesting moment when they go get Zoya, where Nikolai, I think, is experiencing some jealousy over the connection that she has found to Joris. Here it is. What had Zoya just done? How had she withstood the power of Joris's strike? Good, Joris said as they drew apart. He rolled his shoulder as if being nearly cooked alive was a commonplace experience. Zoya's hair was damp with perspiration, her shirt clung to her skin, and her grin was pure exhilaration, a smile he'd never seen from her before. Nikolai found his mood souring. I genuinely, like, this moment to me reads like, I never got her to smile like that. What the fuck? Oh, he's able to bring her something that I could never. Oh, okay, fine. And, oh shit. You know, this is interesting because I think they're both aware that there could be something between them if they let there be. And neither of them is actually willing to lose control at all. They're both so in command of themselves. They have never even come close to crossing that line. But they both know it's there. However, they've, like I said, been in control. And this is the first time, I think, that we have seen real, like, jealousy at all. Neither of them has actually, as far as I know, been with anyone else since they have grown interested in one another and connected. And it's one thing to feel like you're, you know, like Nikolai marrying some woman who is supposed to be a figurehead for his empire. I don't know how much Zoya would feel genuine jealousy over that. But if she saw him, like, truly seeming to enjoy himself, if he seemed to actually fall for somebody, it might be different. And I can't help but wonder as well, she is Grisha and he isn't. And how much of the jealousy might have to do with she's being shown something by a person or a being who has access to kinds of power and knowledge that you'll never have. He literally has something that she could never get from you. That's rough too, you know? Just, there could be a lot behind this. But I did sort of skip over this conversation that he has with Yuri, where it's sort of the same thing. It's part of why I skipped it, but I'll just mention it. Yuri is continuing to sort of defend the Darkling, or say that maybe the Darkling like had some valid points, wondering why Zoya hated the guy so much, and Nikolai basically being like, well, you know, she used to love him. So that's what makes it worse, having adored somebody and trusted them and then finding out that they were full of shit. That's a very different vibe. It's one thing to hate somebody from the start, and it's another thing to feel betrayed. So this is when he's able to take Zoya with him. And Zoya, the thing with her in Juris wants her to stay. And Zoya doesn't even consider staying. She's already like hanging up her weapons while Juris is still arguing about why she shouldn't waste her time. And I really like that. He is giving her something she can't get anywhere else, but her loyalty is still with Nikolai. And Juris seems a little irritated by it. I can't help but wonder if he might have a thing for her or what. So Nikolai also, there's a moment where Juris says something about how she's going to like definitely outlive him and he'll be dead long before she's even begun to really age. And Nikolai keeps thinking about that, which you would. I mean, yikes. So they go to Elizaveta's spire, which sounds so cool. Nikolai could see the shapes of giant insects frozen within each panel, and the whole structure seemed to hum like a great hive. Juris' spire had given the impression of a beast's lair. This place felt like a temple, terrifying and holy. So we go up there and talk to her, and Elizaveta is sort of interesting. She's an enigma a little bit. She is very direct about what's going to be required of Nikolai, but also like pities him clearly as much as she's being pragmatic about what's going to be necessary. We can practice helping him summon and control the monster, but the fight will be his alone. If his will is strong enough, he will survive. If not, the monster will claim him. And essentially, she warns him, this thing's been in your head. It knows exactly what you love and care about. What are your weaknesses? What are the things that you want most? And it will use that shit against you. Because it knows you're trying to kill it, and it's going to fight for its life just the way you will fight for your life. And I really enjoyed his feelings on this. Nikolai supposed he was meant to be cowed. A wise man would probably think twice about being impaled on a giant thorn, but he felt nothing but anticipation. The idea that this was a thing he could face and conquer, or even be destroyed by, was so much easier to accept than the notion of a nightmare he would have to endure forever. 100%. I totally get that. This is like finding out that there's like a really frightening, invasive surgery that you could go through to potentially rid yourself of like a lifelong illness or disability. And it's like a massive risk and might be really painful with a long recovery process, but otherwise you are going to have to deal with this forever. And I think most of us would be willing to take the risk if it looked like it was going to be a cure, and this moment where he's like being tested, it's Elizaveta is like watching him chat with Zoya. And she says, I had intended to torture the monk to force your darkness to the fore, but best to cut to the chase. She lifted a hand, and the floor rose around Zoya, encasing her in glistening panels of amber. And he tries to argue with Elizaveta about how this isn't going to work because I know that you don't intend to kill her, because Juris needs her. And Elizaveta is like, the fuck do I give a shit about what Juris needs? I don't care. Why do you think I care about that? I want to be free of this fucking place. And if she dies to get me that, then oh well. And from somewhere in the thicket, Yuri cried, no, please, you must not. I beg you. So at this point, Nikolai is trying to summon it. And it's not responding. Zoya's screams stopped. Yuri was sobbing. He hurled himself against the barbed thicket. Zoya, he yelled, but it emerged as a snarl. This time he felt the creature inside him drag its way to the surface as if its talons were scraping against his chest cavity. And this is really interesting because he's trying to summon it, and he's trying to tell it, like, this is your chance, I'll let you gnaw on Elizaveta as a thank you. But then once it actually starts to surface, he's saying no. It's like, in theory, definitely want this. Once it begins to happen, oh my God, this is really scary. Nope, don't like this, don't want this. And I think that feels very true. It's one thing in theory. He felt his claws emerge, felt his teeth grow long. He screamed as the wings burst through his back and rose up over the thornwood. Remember who you are. Elizaveta gazed up at him, her face triumphant. Yuri wept. Beside them, Zoya floated in a golden sarcophagus like an angel caught in amber. And he throws himself at this coffin thing, and it does nothing. He turns on Elizaveta, but she just smiles and I am the monster and the monster is me. He could feel the demon fighting for control even as it lent him its strength. With a wave of Elizaveta's hand, the amber walls containing Zoya collapsed and the thornwood wilted into the floor. He seized Zoya's limp body before it could fall. And Zoya opened her eyes. Her face flooded with terror, and she began to thrash in his arms. He wanted to soothe her. The smell of her fear mingled with the sap. It made him feel drunk. It made him feel hungry. All he wanted was to dig his claws into her flesh and consume her. And she is scrambling away from him, she is scrambling away from him. He is watching her and he keeps telling himself, remember who you are. But then as he's looking at her, he thinks, remember who she is. He clung tightly to the recollection. Go, he demanded, go. And it shrinks back, and he is expecting to look up and see Zoya being disgusted and horrified and frightened. And instead, she's fucking beaming at him. And he's like, I almost killed you. And she's like, you didn't. So, ta-da. And Yuri wiped the tears from his face. Will Commander Nazyalensky have to endure this ordeal every time? Elizaveta shrugged. Let us hope not. Nikolai let her help him to his feet, forcing himself to celebrate with the others, but he'd felt the will of the monster, and he wondered whether, when the time came, if he'd be able to match its ferocity. He'd opened the door. He doubted it would be so easy to close the next time. And that is the end of the chapter. So yeah, I'm very excited about this. Let me look, actually. It says I am at about 69% nice through the book. So we're about to get into the last third of this, which means shit is really going to start to pop off. I'm excited. All right. Thank you guys again so much for listening. Thank you to Joanna for commissioning this episode, and I'll be seeing you soon. I believe on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, nope, not until December 21st. So there'll be a bit of a wait, but there's another episode scheduled. So stay tuned. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.